This is Dateline News and Conversation, a special report with our friend Dimitri Lascaris reporting from Canada. Today was a historic day. The International Court of Justice in The Hague voted 15-2 to, I guess, accuse Israel of genocide. But for an in-depth look and explanation to what happened today and what it means and what the consequences are going forward is our friend Dimitri Lascaris. Dimitri, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Regis. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
So, Dimitri, before we go into it any further, I think a lot of people are confused between the ICJ, International Court of Justice, and the ICC. And it was the ICC that I think made a judgment about Vladimir Putin and accused him of kidnapping children or whatever. Can you just briefly explain the difference between the two before we get into this judgment today?
Sure. So the International Court of Justice, which is the court that ruled today, is a creature of the United Nations Charter. It's part of the United Nations system and subject to any reservations that members of the UN might make. It has jurisdiction over disputes between states that are signatories to the United Nations Charter, which I think every state on earth is a signatory to the UN Charter. There might be one or two that aren't, but certainly Israel, the United States, South Africa, and essentially all states are signatories to the UN Charter. It is the highest court in the United Nations system. And because they're signatories to the UN Charter, there can be no dispute from countries like Israel or the United States that they are bound by the decisions of the ICJ. The International Criminal Court is the creation of a separate statute or treaty called the Rome Statute. And there are a number of states that are not signatories to that treaty, that convention, including Israel, the United States, the Russian Federation, and China. So it's a much smaller, significantly smaller number of states that are signatories to and potentially bound by the decisions of the ICC. Also, another important distinction is that whereas the International Court of Justice adjudicates disputes between states, the International Criminal Court prosecutes alleged violations of international law against individuals and actually has the power to order their imprisonment. And one other thing I should add, in relation to what you just said, Regis, is that the ICC, its prosecutor did file an indictment against Vladimir Putin, but there has been no adjudication of that claim by the ICC as of yet, not even a preliminary adjudication. What we have is an indictment, an unadjudicated indictment against Vladimir Putin.
Okay, thanks for that. That clears that up in my mind, and I hope for a lot of other people. Today, the International Court of Justice, in what I think is a historic judgment, came down 15 votes to 2. 17 judges sit on this panel against Israel, demanding a ceasefire and demanding a number of things that they do in terms of the genocide that is going on in Israel. First of all, tell me who is on this court, how are they selected, and then we'll get to talk about the judgment that they filed today.
Well, the judges are appointed by the member states. We don't really need to get into the particulars of that process, but who is on this court is definitely important. And the president of the court, who's, although she has, as president, significant powers that other members of the court don't have. Her vote counts for the same weight as that of any other judge. And that president is Joan E. Donoghue from the United States, who served in the U.S. State Department. I believe it was under the Obama administration, and was supported for her position at the State Department by Hillary Clinton. So this is not a judge you would expect to be sympathetic to the Palestinian people and antagonistic to Israel. The vice president is Kirill Gevorgyan of the Russian Federation. And the other judges, normally, by the way, there's 15 judges. For this decision, there were 17. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But the other judges are from Slovakia, France, Morocco, Somalia, China, Uganda, India, Jamaica, Lebanon, Japan, Germany, Australia, and Brazil. So I just want to highlight the judges who are from Western states or Western aligned states. We're talking about Australia, Germany, Japan, France, the United States, and Slovakia. And with the exception of Britain, which doesn't have a judge on the court at this time, I think we can say that those states, the US, France, Australia, and Germany, are the staunchest supporters, certainly amongst the staunchest supporters of Israel on the international stage, and have been for a long time. Every one of those judges voted in support of this decision today. Now, there were 2 additional judges appointed. In a case of this nature, it is possible for a party to the dispute to say, well, we want to have an additional judge appointed for purposes of this dispute. We call those judges ad hoc. Israel exercised that option, and because it exercised that option, South Africa also had the option of appointing an ad hoc judge. So we ended up with not 15, but 17 judges. And the judge chosen by Israel, interestingly, his name is Aharon Barak. He was the former president of the Supreme Court of Israel, and I think it's fair to say is the most respected Israeli jurist in the history of Israel. Now, I personally, we can get into this if you want. I personally have serious criticisms to level against Aharon Barak and the entire Supreme Court of Israel. I think that the West is far too generous in terms of characterizing this as a court committed to the rule of law and due process and equality and democracy. But the fact of the matter is that he was, I think it's fair to say, the most reputable judge that Israel has produced in its existence. So this judge, the Israeli judge, disagreed with not all of the decision, but the most important part of the decision, in my opinion, and that is the determination that it's plausible that Israel is committing genocide. And the only other judge who disagreed with that conclusion was, interestingly, the judge from Uganda. But no Western judge disagreed.
And the judge from Uganda is a woman. I looked it up. I'm looking at this online right now, who all of these are. Why would Uganda vote against this?
Yeah, her name is Julia Sebutinde. Look, when I saw this today, I did a little bit of investigating into the relations between Uganda and Israel. I'm by no means an expert on that subject. I don't think it's fair to say that Uganda has been, unduly supportive of Israel over the years. It's not been particularly hostile either. It comes as a bit of a surprise that she would have ruled against Israel or against this determination that Israel was plausibly committing genocide. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not really in a position to comment on that because I haven't been able to get a copy of her dissenting opinion. So usually in a situation, it's typical that where a judge disagrees with the decision of the court, they will file their own opinion where they explain why they disagreed. I'm guessing it may be that the basis of her disagreement wasn't on the the substantive question of whether Israel is plausibly committing genocide. She might have disagreed with the decision because she didn't think that the ICJ had jurisdiction to hear it, which is a kind of technical matter. So she might not have even gotten to the question of whether Israel was plausibly committing genocide. I just don't know, and I won't be able to say anything about that until I read her dissenting opinion.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I was really confused as a layman about all of these conditions that had to be met for something to qualify or classify as genocide. Can you explain that for me and others in layman's terms? What did all of that mean?
Well, basically, the definition of genocide, it's not overly complicated. It's in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention of 1948. You can easily find that online. And just briefly, genocide in international law means the commission of certain inhumane acts, which include but are not limited to the killing of members of a protected group, depriving the members of a protected group of the conditions necessary to sustain life, the imposition of mental harm on the members of the protected group, and some other specific acts. And if you commit just one of these inhumane acts, you don't have to commit all of them, the 5 that are listed in the convention, and you do it with an intention to destroy in whole or in part the protected group, then you are guilty of genocide. Now, when it comes to the intention, that the requisite intention, as I mentioned, it's either in whole or in part. The courts over the years have interpreted in part to mean a substantial part of the protected population, a part of the protected population that is sufficiently large that its destruction will have an impact on the entire group. So one of the questions the court had to deal with here was, is the intention or the evidence of intention to destroy the group, would that constitute or be, would that evince an intention to destroy a substantial part of the population? And the court determined that yes, the evidence at this stage suggests that the intention is to destroy a substantial part of the Palestinian population. But that's essentially the definition of genocide. And I've been saying from day one that I think it's a slam dunk that this definition has been satisfied by Israel's conduct.
Yeah, as I understood it, when this American president of the ICJ read all of this, and she got to that part about what qualifies as genocide, I went, damn, this is a slam dunk. I mean, anybody who wants to look at this objectively over the last 3 months, 100 days, has got to admit that this has all taken place and continues to take place in Palestine, in Gaza. I mean, it's all over the YouTube. Millions of people around the world are protesting. It's really been amazing. And I think people have been in great anticipation for this judgment. Now, when it comes to intent, this is the part of the judgment or the reading of this judgment that I really thought was important. The court, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, made it clear that with testimony from Netanyahu himself, other members of the Knesset, other people in Israel, have indicated that this was their purpose. I mean, that has been so clear. I mean, it's all over YouTube. Can you comment on that?
It's astonishing how open the leaders of Israel have been about their intention to destroy Gaza, which clearly constitutes a substantial part of the population, the Palestinian population. And South Africa's meticulously detailed 84-page brief, there was page after page of statements coming from the whole spectrum of the Israeli political elite, and members of the Knesset and media organizations, pundits, where they're openly expressing their bloodlust for the destruction of the Palestinian people, and particularly Gaza. It's, normally when people engage in behavior of this level of criminality, they have at least the minimal rationality to try to conceal or obscure what their objectives are. But here it's almost as if the Israeli political elite has been trying to hang itself. And I mean, there was so much evidence in this regard that the court confined itself to only a few examples today. And I want to highlight one in particular. They gave examples. They cited the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. They cited the Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, but the most important one from my perspective is they cited the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog. Isaac Herzog was quoted as saying by the president of the ICJ today the following: we are operating militarily according to rules of international law unequivocally. That, of course, is nonsense. And he goes on to say, it is an entire nation out there that is responsible. It is not true, this rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved. It is absolutely not true. They could have risen up. They could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat. So what Herzog did when he said this, and this was at the very outset of this sadistic, barbaric military campaign, he was essentially saying that there are no innocents in Gaza, one half of whose population is children. And even the adult civilians, I mean, there's no basis whatsoever to say that these people could have, prevented Hamas from being the rulers of Gaza. That is a highly dubious proposition, even if we're talking only about adults. And furthermore, if you extend that reasoning to Israel, okay, whose government is committing crimes against humanity, then every single person, every single civilian in Israel would be culpable and a legitimate target, because they could have risen up against this government that's violating international law on a daily basis, committing more crimes and crimes against humanity on a daily basis. And because they didn't do that, they're legitimate targets for the Palestinian people. Why doesn't that, absurd reasoning extend to Israel itself and to the Israeli population itself? Obviously, it doesn't. This was a plainly genocidal statement, in my opinion. And what I find really interesting is that this character, Isaac Herzog, is constantly presented to the public in the West as a figure of moderation and restraint in Israel. And in fact, only days ago, he was being feted at the World Economic Forum in Gaza, in Davos, I should say, treated by all of these, billionaires and, members of the financial press, these obsequious members of financial press, as a respectable figure. And here we have, only days later, after Davos, the ICJ citing the words of the president of Israel himself as evidence of genocidal intent. I think that's really just a raging indictment of the financial elite and the political elite of the West.
Wow. As I listened to this today, and as I'm listening to you now describing this, I'm getting this really emotional reaction, this queasy reaction in my stomach. I mean, I'm feeling this, not that I haven't felt it as I've watched all of this unfold, but with the report from the ICJ, I just was very, very moved. This is not the New York Times. It's not the Washington Post. It's not the Economist. This is judges from all these countries coming down with this condemnation of what is going on in Palestine. Now, I have a couple of other questions that I think need to be answered. Dimitri, in your mind, what does this judgment really mean? And will anything come of it?
That is the key question, Regis. And so let's just start by reiterating that This is not a final determination that Israel is committing genocide. What was sought by South Africa was an order requiring measures or imposing upon Israel obligations that would protect the civilian population of Gaza and stop the mass slaughter and ensure that they have adequate humanitarian relief. So for purposes of obtaining that interim relief, or what they call provisional measures, all they had to show was that it's plausible that Israel is violating the Genocide Convention. The question of whether Israel is actually violating the Genocide Convention will be litigated in the months ahead, and will probably take years to determine, because to make a definitive determination, they're going to need to look at a lot of sworn testimony. There's going to have to be cross-examinations. There's going to have to be forensic examinations done, which are not possible right now because of the conditions in Gaza. So it's just a reality of litigation, especially when you're involved in allegations of this seriousness, that the final adjudication will take years. And in the interim, if you could only protect the population once the final determination has been made, you'd never be able to stop a genocide. By the time the final determination is made, the genocide will have been consummated. So international law and the Genocide Convention is structured in such a way as to enable courts and authorize courts to intervene where there is plausible evidence of genocide, but a final determination has not been made. So that's what's happened here. Now, I've been talking to you about Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, which defines genocide. There's another article, Article 1, which imposes upon all signatories an obligation to prevent genocide. So it's not simply that they have to punish it after the fact. They actually have to take positive steps to prevent it. And when is that obligation triggered? That obligation is triggered when there arises a serious risk that genocide is being committed. And this is something that an organization called the International Commission of Jurists talked about in November. They issued a statement. These are 60 leading judges and scholars and practitioners in international law. And they said at that point in time that there was a serious risk that genocide was being committed, and therefore the obligation under Article 1 to prevent genocide had been triggered. Now that the International Court of Justice has ruled that it's plausible that Israel is committing genocide, and particularly by a vote of 15-2, with all the Western judges lining up in support, nobody can plausibly argue anymore that the obligations under Article 1 have not been triggered. It is clear that the obligations under Article 1 have been triggered. And that means that every single state that is a signatory to the Genocide Convention, which includes the United States, which includes Britain, which includes Canada, the country where I'm currently situated, which includes Israel, have a positive obligation to take steps to stop the genocide in Gaza, to prevent that from happening. So it's no longer possible for any government, as a result of this decision, on God's green earth, to the extent it's been supportive of Israel in the past, to just engage in business as usual. That's no longer, they cannot plausibly claim with a straight face that they're complying with their obligations under the Genocide Convention if they just conduct business as usual with Israel. They are now going to have to change in an antagonistic and adversarial way their relationship to Israel. Exactly what that means, is a subject of debate. So will they have to impose economic sanctions on Israel? Will they have to sever diplomatic relations with Israel? Will they have to, at a bare minimum, stop sending weapons to Israel? Will they have to take steps to prosecute leaders of Israel in their domestic courts for crimes against humanity? These are all questions that have now been opened up, that have to be debated, that have to be weighed by every single government that is a signatory to the Genocide Convention, and they're going to have to do something. Else they will have no plausible argument that they themselves are complying with their obligations under the Genocide Convention. And if they don't do anything, if they just pursue business as usual, they themselves will become subject to prosecution under the Genocide Convention for failing to comply with their obligations under Article 1. So I don't harbor any illusions that the result of this decision is going to be a cessation of hostilities in Gaza today or tomorrow. Sure, I think we can anticipate that Israel is going to thumb its nose at this decision for some time, and the slaughter will continue. But this has changed the entire complexion of international relations vis-a-vis Israel, and I think the consequences for the state of Israel are going to be profound. It will take some time to play out, weeks, perhaps months, but the game has changed decisively in favor of the Palestinian people.
You know, as you were explaining this, Dimitri, I was getting angry. You know, we got this legal mumbo jumbo. Well, it's not over. It's not definitive. It's got to go to a final judgment. And in the meantime, Israel is just going to continue, as you said, thumb their nose at this and continue the slaughter. The other part of this that really bothers me is, and I understand what you just said, all of these countries can be judged complicit in the genocide if they don't act to do something to prevent it. Realistically, Dimitri, do you see any of these countries, much less the United States, that will do anything significant to stop this?
Yes, I think it is. I'm not particularly hopeful in the near term about the United States and Britain. I wouldn't rule that out, though, Regis. Let me just say a word about the United States and the Biden administration. It was front page news in The Guardian, which has done, in my opinion, an appalling job of reporting the facts about this genocide. It was front page news in The Guardian a day or two ago that a poll in the United States just showed that 35% of Americans believe Israel is committing genocide. Okay? The percentage who disagreed that Israel is committing genocide was essentially the same, 36%. And the rest were undecided. This is before the ICJ issued this ruling. And by the way, the percentage of Democrats who believe that Israel is committing genocide just before the ICJ ruling was about 50%. I think it might have been in excess of 50%. Now that the ICJ has rendered this decision, it is almost certain that the percentage of the American population, particularly Democrats who believe Israel is committing genocide, is going to rise dramatically. So the Biden administration is now confronting a situation. I mean, effectively, it is destroying, if it continues sending bombs to Israel, any prospect it has of re-election. I mean, right now, its prospects of re-election are hanging by a thread. But with this decision, Mr. Genocide Joe Biden is stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if he continues with business as usual against Israel, I mean, I think that he has almost no prospect of being elected. And that's something that's going to be of great concern to him, because if Trump comes to power, you know, and I'm no fan of Trump, but Trump is going to be on the warpath. And frankly, he has a lot of evidence at his disposal that Mr. Biden and company were engaged in some extraordinarily corrupt activities, particularly in Ukraine, through his son, Hunter Biden. And he will pursue that evidence wherever it may lead. So Biden has a personal stake in re-election, not just his, he covets power, which is obviously the case. He's always been a person who covets power above all else, but he's got to worry about the prospect of being prosecuted for corruption. He's going to want to win that election. And this decision is going to imperil his chances of winning that election unless he changes his policies towards Israel and Palestine dramatically. And, what I find interesting is going on in the background here is that the press is reporting that in the last couple of days, Israel has made an offer of a temporary ceasefire. We don't have a lot of clarity on what that offer is, but what they're saying is they would stop hostilities in Gaza for 2 months. And there would be an exchange of hostages. During that time, Hamas would have to release all its hostages, and Israel would also release some of its hostages. What is not clear is how far Israel is willing to go. Hamas is saying you have to release all the prisoners, thousands of them. Israel has steadfastly resisted this. But the details of this offer aren't what is particularly important. What I think is telling is that this offer was put on the table, and it undermines everything Israel has been saying. Israel's position has been absolutist. We will not stop this war until we have every hostage back. We will not stop this war until we've completely destroyed Hamas. It's just magically 48 hours before this decision comes out, Israel is resiling from all of that. They're saying, we'll stop the war for 2 months if you give us back the hostages. And they're saying, they even offer it as part of this offer to allow the leaders of Hamas to leave Gaza. So they would be given safe passage out of Gaza, and they would be able to continue their activities, presumably from some other country. But they're no longer demanding that all these people be killed or surrender. Why is Israel, all of a sudden showing this weakness? Well, I think part of the reason is because they anticipated that this decision was going to come out and it was going to be bad. And they're getting some serious pressure from the Biden administration to put an end to the slaughter. So, yeah, I think that the gig is up for Israel. And this decision is going to be a very important piece of the puzzle in terms of finally bringing justice for the Palestinian people. It's very sad and tragic and outrageous that, there isn't going to be immediate compliance with this decision, as there should be. But I still think it's a game changer. And, the world of pro-Israel advocacy will never be the same.
Well, from what I can tell, the people of the world have already spoken. Millions, tens of millions, who knows, maybe billions of people around the world are rising up. There's images and videos on YouTube of these massive protests that are taking place all over the world, including the United States. And I think this judgment is only going to embolden these groups. The people of the world have spoken and have judged Israel for what they've been doing in Palestine. I mean, this is humanity feeling the pain and the scourge of this, unprecedented almost assault on a people that is completely the people are defenseless, except for Hamas, except for the PLO, whatever, but they don't have an air force, they don't have nuclear weapons, etc. Now, I want
to say, Regis, I couldn't agree more with what you said. I mean, the vast majority of people aren't lawyers, obviously. And even lawyers, most of them don't really know much about international law. So, when you're out there looking at these images of what is being done to the people of Gaza and feeling horror, you hear these pundits on television, particularly in the West, in the media, coming out and saying, oh, no, this doesn't satisfy the definition of genocide. They kind of hold themselves out as experts. And a lot of people don't know what to make of it, even though they can see with their own eyes something that's horrifying and appalling to them. People are able to obfuscate, these so-called experts, the legality of all of this. But when the ICJ, the highest court in the United Nations system, by a vote of 15-2 renders this judgment, all of a sudden laypersons, they are emboldened because now they know. They don't need experts to tell them what is and is not going on in Gaza from a legal perspective. The ICJ has spoken. It is plausible that Israel is committing genocide. So yes, absolutely. I think this is going to reinvigorate, to a degree that we haven't seen up until now, the already elevated level of outrage and indignation amongst the peoples of this world about what is being done in Gaza. That is another implication of this decision. It is going to have a massive effect on public opinion globally, to the detriment of Israel's apartheid regime.
Yeah. I have one last question, because this has bothered me since this began. Is this going to have any effect on the other neighboring Arab and Muslim nations who have, except for Yemen, maybe Iran indirectly, maybe Syria indirectly? Will this have any positive effect, any effect on them to be more courageous in standing up now for the people, their brothers and sisters in Palestine? What are your thoughts?
Look, these people, like we're talking about, the Saudi autocracy or the dictatorship in Egypt and so forth, these people have always had contempt for international law. So it's not going to directly impact them, but it will indirectly impact them for the very reason that you and I were just discussing. So in Saudi Arabia, before the ICJ's decision, a poll was done that showed 96% of the people of Saudi Arabia wanted the monarchy to sever relations with Israel. 96%. That's absolutely astonishing. This decision is going to increase significantly the hostility of the Saudi public to Israel and its belief in the injustice of all of this and the illegality of all of this. And that in turn is going to place enormous pressure on the Saudi autocracy, the Egyptian dictator, all the governments of the Middle East to take at least more decisive action vis-a-vis Israel, because they're going to have to worry about, the possibility of a social explosion in their own countries. This decision has increased considerably the risk of major instability at the grassroots level in the Middle East. So I think, at least in that respect, even though they don't have any inherent concern for international law and the orders of international institutions, the impact this will have on public opinion in their own countries is something that will be of the utmost concern to them.
Yeah, this is something that I've always wondered about. You've got the governments who have really been beholden to the United States. On the other hand, I believe they've been afraid of Israel, that had this powerful military, supposedly, but they had the bomb. None of them have had it. They've had to kowtow, in a sense, to the United States to play nice and not to unify as an Islamic nation or community. And I'm hoping that the people in these other countries will begin to realize this, what's happening to them is the same kind of thing that could happen to their own population.
Right.
And so, I don't know, Dimitri. I'm hopeful, but I don't see this genocide, these attacks on Hamas, the attacks on Gaza. I don't see any of that stopping tomorrow as a result of that. What do you think?
No, I would be astonished if it stopped tomorrow, but I think that within the reasonably near term, which is to say, within the next several weeks, we may see a dramatic change in circumstances on the ground in Gaza for the better. And in the longer run, and I know this is of little solace to the people in Gaza who are suffering immensely every minute of every day, I think this has done enormous good for the cause of Palestinian justice and self-determination.
Well, you and I have talked about this, and you've said it very clearly. And as another result of this and this judgment, the state of Israel has no future, given the reaction of the rest of the world and the judgment of this court.
Well, the defenders of Israel love to accuse those of us who criticize its human rights abuses of attempting to delegitimize Israel. Well, it wasn't us. It was Israel's own conduct and the decision of this court, which that conduct provoked, which has delegitimized Israel. Israel has been thoroughly delegitimized in the eyes of the global community now. And that, as I said, is going to have profound consequences for Israel and for the Palestinian people in the weeks and months ahead.